So, today's video is not going to have a lot of slides or projection or PowerPoint. It's just going to be a talking video. It's going to be a simple discussion. I might not even put this through the normal scope I do to try and check the sound was all okay before uploading it. The question today that I'm sort of trying to explain is deterrence. It's a topic I talk about a lot on my channel, and it's a topic I talk about a lot when teaching. Deterrence, whether conventional or strategic, is about stopping problems before they become problems. And that can seem strange. When is the best time to stop a fire? Before it starts. When is the best time to stop a crime? Before it happens. You don't need to arrest someone to stop a crime. You need to deter them from committing the crime. And it's the same with war. The best time to stop a war is before it starts. I often get this question asked in the discussion of the 1920s and 30s and whether there was anything anyone could do to stop war. I don't think you can stop the world wars. But I think you can potentially stop it getting as bad as it got. Ultimately, the treaty system was a failure of deterrence prior to World War I, and that wasn't the treaty's fault. It wasn't even the way the treaties were structured fault. It's the way they were communicating. You see, deterrence always requires three things. One of those is you communicate the deterrence. And the trouble is with diplomatic language, in trying not to be offensive, you can come across as weak. In trying not to give a casus belli to the other side by being insulting, you can come across as wishy-washy. And that is always a fine art. A fine art. In a way, those who are plain-spoken have always had an advantage, because everyone expects them to be plain-spoken. But the trouble is, you do not usually rise up in most governments by being a plain-spoken person, because plain-spoken people tend to be plain-spoken to both the ones below them and the ones above them. And there are many, many people who do not like people below them who are plain-spoken. So the first is communication. The second is preparation. You have to have armed forces that are well trained, well drilled, and well equipped, and appropriate to the size of the task you need them to do. Believe it or not, deterrence requires a lot less force than war does. But if you undersource deterrence, you are going to have to do so much more in wartime. So it's a difficult arc, really, to chart. And it is an arc. It's not a straight line. You see, it's like this. Depending on your level of conflict, the amount you have to spend in deterrence goes up. If you are trying to deter a peer conflict on the scale of a superpower, even with an alliance, you're going to have to spend far more than if you're a very small nation and your only real threat is your next door neighbour, who's also an equally small nation. But you're still going to have to spend money. There is this really bad piece of history which keeps going on, or rather faux history, of hard times create hard people, soft times, hard times create hard people create good soft times create soft people create hard times. I'm sorry, there's no rhyme or reason to that history at all. And when it's attributed to the fall of the Roman Empire, it's completely missing the basic problem for the Roman Empire isn't that they are now soft. It's that they think they've come away with they've managed to come with a way of squaring a circle, of being able to lower taxes and still get the same security, and that security is they hire barbarians, or as they called them, or rather people from outside Rome, who wanted to be Roman citizens, and then they kept welshing on what they were going to pay them in the first place. They kept going, no, we're not going to pay you that. And the trouble is, if your army's composed of people who aren't citizens, who don't have a stake in your country, and that doesn't mean you have to be born there, but if you're going to deny the soldiers citizen rights, if you're not going to support them, then you tend to find that when you need them to put it all on the line to do what they need to do, to risk it all, they're less inclined to risk things. And then if you don't pay them, they might do things like, I don't know, sack the capital city to get their pay. And then you find out, hang on, they're the army which is supposed to be defending the city, but we haven't paid them. Now they're attacking the city and we have no army to defend ourselves with. That's a conundrum. So, communication. And you need capable armed forces. And what's the final thing you need for deterrence? What is it? What is the third thing? Conviction. And it's not just from the politicians, it has to be on a national level. There has to be a willingness to stand up for whatever you're going to do it for. That's sometimes the toughest thing, because in its abstract, fighting for your country for a point of principle can seem, from some perspectives, as a perfectly wonderful thing to do, and from other perspectives, as a perfectly pointless thing to do. And those perspectives can be within the same person, let alone within different people, have different perspectives. But sometimes that's what you need to be prepared to do. You need to decide what values, what things matter to you, whether it's sovereignty, whether it's the freedom for people to choose who their leaders are, whether it's the right of one country to be peaceful and conduct its own business in its own ways. You have to decide what you're prepared to risk things for. Because ultimately, you can deter conflicts far more easily if your opponent automatically thinks they will fight, they can fight, so it's better for me not to even put it there. Or rather, if you project yourself as strong enough and capable enough by actually having it. And this is the trouble with military forces and holding up a mirage, an image, and going, yeah, they're super strong. No. It doesn't take a genius to analyze force tables. It doesn't take someone who's had over 30 years of reading military history, naval history, various other areas of history, and studying defense and war studies and all sorts of things to work out whether a country is really strong in its armed forces or not. No, usually you can tell quite quickly. And you can also tell whether they're quite serious. It's just the odd questions. Oh, they have this many tanks. How many can they actually use? How many aircraft have they ordered? They're trumpeting a lot the quality of this aircraft, but how many have they ordered? How many they're replacing? Because, yes, an aircraft or a ship or a vehicle might be 10 times more capable than what it's going to replace. But unless it's the TARDIS, it can only be in one place at a time. It can only be deterring one conflict at a time. And there is some advantage to a certain level of critical mass of deployment. Deploying a battle group sounds great until you realise that's a slightly warmed up version of a battalion. Deploying a brigade, that sounds slightly better. A division, a corps, an army. Deploying a warship sounds great until you realise that warship is an OPV, i.e. a patrol vessel. In which case, what's that being deployed for? If it's small nations causing trouble and you are a massively larger nation watching the situation, it's basically a calculated insult that is acting as a deterrence. It's an insult on the level of, okay, you are so small, I can send a baby ship, i.e. an OPV or a sloop, to watch what you're up to, report back, and tell you to stop if you're being annoying, because if you don't listen to this vessel, the next thing that turns up is going to knock you all on your That's deterrence. That's conflict management. The other phrase we like to use around deterrence these days. Conflict management. How to manage conflicts. And I'd love to say it's different from most lessons you probably learned in the schoolyard. I'd love to say it is. But it really isn't that different. You see, when you're dealing with nation states and nations, we often think of ourselves as dealing with all the people, but you're not. You're dealing with a small group at the top, usually. That's who you're trying to deter. That's whose minds you're trying to get in. That's who you're trying to impress. When they're making decisions, that's not even something you should be thinking about. Messing with them? No. Doesn't matter whether it's conventional, or nuclear, or any other form of strategic deterrent, and thankfully, all nations have kept to nuclear. There are other weapons, though, underneath the strategic bracket, and that should worry us all. Because those are far more dangerous. You see, nuclear, yes, it's got radiation and it goes off and there's a big boom. Some of the other weapons that can be included in that bracket, they have orders of effect which can go on many, many, many times and cause disruption far beyond their target. Do you know what the really, really weird thing about the world wars is? As someone who teaches and specializes in deterrence? They are fought by the world's greatest powers, mostly misunderstanding what's being communicated to them by others, and mostly making a judgment call because they decide it's not that important, so no one will care. When Hitler marched into Poland, he didn't think anyone would do anything about it. He didn't imagine it would lead to war. When Kaiser Wilhelm gave Franz Joseph, the Emperor of Austria, a blank check, he had no concept that the British would be involved in the war. He felt the British wouldn't get involved. After all, whilst they kept their fleet in harbour and together, and they kept the fleet together, that wasn't a dangerous thing for them to do. Now, this is usually the point when people point to Admiral Fisher and go, well, yes, Admiral Fisher would have aggressively pushed the fleet off the coast of Germany if he'd been First Sea Lord. He might have done. But the trouble is, that could have taken it a little bit too far. That could have been considered a grave insult to Germany and pushed them into war. And there's your problem. How do you deter in that situation? The one good thing about Lord Fisher as First Sea Lord was he never understood the concept that it was for the civilian politicians to talk to the press and carry out the battle of words with foreign governments. It was incredibly annoying for governments at the time, but it allowed them to speak softly because Fisher was the one waving a big stick around and shouting about it. Teddy Roosevelt talks a lot in his works about walking softly and carrying a big stick. And the thing is, it's important where you carry that stick. If you have it behind you, then people might not see it. If you have it in front of you, it looks aggressive. You've got to carry it in a way that people can see it, but it's not aggressive. Port it on your arm like a rifle? Potentially. Could still be considered worrying. If you carry it down by your side, that can also be an issue. You have to think these things through. The really clever thing might be to carry a big enough stick that you can stick it over your shoulders so it sticks out nice and wide. And everyone can see it. But your hands are free. That is the trouble with conventional deterrence. Working it out, what is the right path to choose, and what path will work for you, is often a very complicated judgment call. Sometimes it's being in a multinational alliance with a lot of other powers, but then you have to remember that that alliance is only as strong not as its power which spends the least amount of money on defense. No, that is a understanding which is proved faulty very, very well with regular occurrence. No, alliances are as strong or as weak as the member with the least conviction. Sad, that one. It's very sad. So there you go. Conventional deterrence. Strategic deterrence. In a nutshell. It's all about looking strong enough that the concept of fighting you doesn't even enter the question. Presenting an image not just of physical strength but moral strength. That the question doesn't even enter the equation. That the first question is not, can we fight? But how do we talk? A well-crafted formation of deterrence, a well-crafted and organised professional armed forces that can achieve the deterrence required for their nation, well, it aims to never fight a war, never fight a battle. Let your drills be bloodless battles, and your battles bloody drills. It's an old saying. But truthfully, if you train and prepare to fight the toughest of wars, if you do this in a way which is visible and proven, you'll often find that you might not have to fight a battle at all. And I have to add in, there are a lot of myths that we carry around today from history about what should go into an armed forces, who should be in it. And I will say this on the matter, because I know someone's going to comment below, oh yes, but if we let these people in, that's going to make us look weak. No, it doesn't. The reason I can answer that question quite so positively is, if you are thinking war has ever been decided by sheer strength of individuals alone, rather than cumulative strength of the nation and of its people and its armed forces, then you've missed a lot of history. And these days, strength is definitely more than ever as much about brain power as it is about physical muscles. And it always has been, because let's say you have 300 of the strongest soldiers. They are the strongest, peakest, best fighters you can have. And they're all armed to the teeth with armor and swords and shields and everything they need in that sort of medieval period. The amount of armies like that which ran into some archers in woods, just a couple of archers, who would never in a hand-to-hand fight would stand a chance against the soldiers, whittled them down. There have been countless wars in the past, and more often than not, wars are won and decided not by strength in arms, but strength of arms. That's a combination of brain power and muscle. And the more mechanized war gets, well, the more the muscle doesn't come from the fleshy or squidgy organic fleshy bit. The more the muscle comes from the machine. Which brings a whole new thing to deterrence. Where do you draw the line when it comes to uncrewed, automated systems? Where do you draw the line if your opponent's taking pot shots at them? Do you engage? Do you not engage? It's a tough call, and so far at the moment the line seems to be we don't do much of anything. We just make sure it doesn't happen again. Usually by sending crewed aircraft out to protect the uncrewed aircraft. Conventional deterrence is about to get a lot more complicated because, as a rule, one of the issues has always been risking the squidgy organic bits in anything we do. It's also going to require a lot more brain power to figure out what's going on and make the right call about how to show strength, about how to show that conviction. Because if you get it wrong with deterrence, then you get war. And for every pound or dollar or whatever you're spending that you're complaining about spending on defense in peacetime in the cause of deterrence, you're going to be spending 100, 1,000-fold in wartime. And in peacetime, you can plan it around your economy. You can do it in a way that boosts your economy. In wartime, there are many other things seeking to devastate your economy, let alone the amount you're going to spend on actually fighting the war. Or, of course, you can give in, but usually that means that the people who end up in charge are the bullies are prepared to use force to get what they want. And that means you no longer have any choice in who leads you. So there you go. A little bit of an introduction to deterrence. A little bit of a thought process. Something I've been mulling over for a couple of days. Now, what else we've got? Well, I'm not adding a question today. I know Wednesday videos are a bit of a random mix. They sometimes have comment response videos. They sometimes have people coming to have a chat. Who knows? They might even have some lives to get thrown in there at some point. That could be fun. Special lives where I have guests on. I'm working through the systems. It's strange. I've managed to get the computer system all working now, and I'm about to move house, so that'll be fun. But those will be on Wednesdays. And we've got June. The patron premieres have been decided. We've got No Treaties: Economic Impacts of either a failed Washington or London London #1 naval treaty. Kaiser doubles down. Wilhelm decides to try and outbuild the Royal Navy at any costs. Issues for Germany and Britain's response. I'm basically in that one. I have an honest feeling that the German army might rebel against Kaiser Wilhelm. We'll leave that to one side. Congo's at Jutland. That should be fun. But the interesting question is, if the Congos are with the battlecruiser fleet at Jutland, what else might be at Jutland? And what else might not be at Jutland? And how does it affect the force balance? And that's quite an interesting one to work through. And then we've got Fisher's Courageous Flying Fish. After the Japanese government's performance at Tsingtao, Fisher goes for carriers. That was a Brew Ships Live tiebreaker, because actually the number 4 and 5 were absolutely tied for votes. And so I did, while live on Patreon, while live on Brew Ships video, I did, hey, here's a do a vote. Make a decision. I hope you're looking forward to those. They're all going to come out in June as premieres, while I'm in the process of moving and sorting out a whole dozen other things, it seems. Thank you very much. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you found it thought-provoking. That's the point. It's some musings, really, on deterrence. Some thoughts on deterrence. Thank you. Take care and have a nice day.